A major caregiving remodel? Costing $30,000? What are you talking about? Huh? Am I speaking with my wife's family? This call came from a man claiming to be my estranged sister-in-law's husband. From the disjointed conversation, it seemed my sister-in-law had stirred up some trouble. I'm Jane, a 56-year-old homemaker. I have a son and a daughter, both of whom are adults and have moved out. Now, it's just me, my husband, and his parents living together. I have a good relationship with my in-laws, perhaps because I lost my own parents early. My husband and I were enjoying our life after our kids became independent. When we got married, living with his parents was a condition, but my mother-in-law, having struggled with her own mother-in-law, kindly converted our house into a duplex for our sake. Although we lived together, we each had our private spaces, which might have contributed to our good relationship. During the day, with my husband still working, I often spent time with my in-laws. That day, while my father-in-law was busy with farm work, I was preparing lunch in the kitchen to eat together outside. Then came the call. He had fallen and fractured a bone, and was already taken to our family doctor in a pickup truck. My mother-in-law and I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. Arriving there, we learned he was undergoing emergency surgery. He appeared healthy, but at his age, in his 80s, a fracture meant a difficult rehabilitation. We had to brace ourselves for a possible wheelchair-bound life. I just wanted him to live. That was enough. I would become his legs. With a prayerful heart, we waited for the surgery to end. When my husband, finished with work, arrived, the surgery was over. Seeing my father-in-law sleeping in the hospital room, the three of us sighed in relief that it wasn't more serious. We decided to support him together. However, our prayers were in vain. A month later, he passed away unexpectedly. His age had weakened his strength and immunity, and he succumbed to an infection after the surgery. Many of his friends and relatives were also elderly, and contacting them for the wake and funeral seemed more of a burden. We decided on a family funeral. But even with a family funeral, problems persisted. "What about your daughter?" I asked. Recalling the drama around her wedding, both my husband and mother-in-law visibly showed their displeasure. My in-laws vehemently opposed my sister-in-law's marriage. Even my husband, not as much as his parents, didn't seem purely happy about it. As a result, it led to disputes and a strained relationship. Yet for my sister-in-law, he was her true father. Shouldn't they at least be present for his final farewell? When I shared my thoughts, they agreed, saying it's up to her if contact could be made. But despite trying the known contacts, we couldn't reach my sister-in-law, and the day of the funeral arrived without her. She's had her share of troubles. This must have been her fate. "Don't worry about it, Jane," my mother-in-law said, gently patting my shoulder as we moved from the funeral home to the crematorium, and then returned home with my father-in-law's ashes. The sudden passing of my father-in-law left us unprepared. We hastily arranged the funeral and cremation. We paid our respects to his remains and spent several days in a state of listlessness. It's fine when my husband is around. We always have something to talk about. But when he leaves for work, I can't stand the silence of the room, so I head to my mother-in-law's room. She must be feeling more pain and sorrow than me. After all, she was suddenly left alone by her husband of many years. Even if it's just a facade, I decided to be cheerful in front of her. However, she seemed to have accepted reality far better than I had expected. "I thought I'd stay like this for a while," she said. "That's right. Sorting through his belongings can wait. But you know, I am over 80 now. You're a very youthful 80-year-old. She often says she hasn't been sick much, only hospitalized for childbirth. Meaning, she's healthy enough for me not to worry. She's implying that indirectly. You say such nice things, Jane. But while I can still move, I want to sort through my things, including what I have of his." I understood her desire not to have her late husband's precious belongings arbitrarily sorted by someone else. "Understood. Let me know when you need help," I said, and she immediately asked for assistance with items that required a stepladder to reach. Old photos of my father-in-law emerged, and she fondly recounted their memories. This was from a trip then, this one from that time. As I listened, nodding, the phone rang. Since my mother-in-law doesn't have a smartphone, the landline is our main means of communication. Who could it be? The callers are usually limited to close acquaintances who know our current situation. I would think they'd avoid calling, knowing our circumstances. It might be something urgent. I'll answer it. It was better for me to move than to make her stand and sit repeatedly, which she said was becoming difficult. I hurried to the phone near the entrance and heard an unfamiliar man's voice, very polite, claiming to be my sister-in-law's husband. But I had never met him. I wasn't sure if this person was really who he claimed to be. Could this be some new scam targeting the elderly? As I listened skeptically, he said, about the caregiving renovation for your father-in-law. But he had passed away. Why bring up caregiving renovation now? A mistake with my mother-in-law? No, she's not in need of such care. Sorry, are you sure you have the right house? Wait. Isn't this my wife's family home? The man, claiming to be my sister-in-law's husband, mentioned her maiden name. It matched my husband's family name, confirming this was indeed the correct household. And the name he mentioned was undoubtedly my husband's sister. Certainly, she is my husband's sister. Thank goodness. Thank you for believing me. I was worried our marriage had caused more trouble. I didn't know the reason for the opposition to their marriage. But the man didn't give off a bad impression. Rather, he seemed humble and sincere. He mentioned a caregiving renovation cost of $30,000 and his intention to fully pay it, acknowledging the trouble they had caused, but he couldn't arrange the full amount by the deadline and asked for an extension. I let him explain before interjecting, and he spoke with such earnestness, I almost forgot to tell him the truth. Thank you for being so considerate. About the extension. Please hold on. When was this caregiving renovation discussed? My father-in-law was very fit, farming right up until recently. Does that mean there was no need for? None at all. Past tense? Yes. He has passed away. We recently completed his funeral and cremation. Excuse me? What? I could picture his panic through the phone. He must be confused by the disparity between what his wife told him and the truth I shared. His words were jumbled, not making much sense. He slowly explained that he caused a lot of trouble for his in-laws and brother-in-law during their wedding. He was told by his wife that her father needed care and wanted to offer financial support as an apology for the trouble. I sensed his honesty and asked how long ago the caregiving issue came up. It started a few years ago. He began sending a fixed amount monthly for caregiving expenses. But I had never heard about this from either my father-in-law or mother-in-law. If they knew, they would have invited him to the funeral. He said we were being forgiven gradually, so I thought it was okay. If you were being forgiven, wouldn't he talk to you too? Yes, you're right. He mentioned the amount he sent increased over the years. Despite regular monthly payments, he was asked for extra money, something we had no knowledge of. So, not a single dime reached you? I replied no, and could imagine his deep disappointment. I felt guilty for being the bearer of such news. As I listened to you, it occurred to me about your wife. I couldn't say outright that he was being scammed, but he caught on and said there was no need for concern, he was being deceived. I remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. He took my silence as affirmation. Assuming he was being scammed, he asked, what should I do? I thought, how can I answer that? Yet, as distantly related as we were, my sister-in-law was still my husband's sister. I couldn't ignore her. I said we would discuss it and get back to him, ending the conversation for the day. Returning to my mother-in-law, she remarked, you were on the phone for quite a while. Aggressive sales call? Just hang up on those. No, it was someone claiming to be your daughter's husband. I relayed the phone conversation to her. As she listened, anger shook her body, and upon finishing, her fury erupted. What a child! Using her father to beg her husband for money. It seemed my sister-in-law had always been reckless with money, owning expensive brands beyond her allowance or part-time earnings, and her actions were often suspicious. When she wanted to marry, her partner was high income with substantial assets, so my in-laws were strongly opposed. Their opposition was not for their daughter's sake, but for her partner's. We decided to confront my sister-in-law at her home with the help of her husband. When was the last time I saw her? I think it was when I had decided to date my husband with the intention of getting married, and I met his parents to introduce myself. Before I officially got married to my husband, there was some drama involving my sister-in-law's wedding. At that time, I had no official relationship with my in-laws, so I wasn't present. That's why I'll be meeting her husband for the first time. From what I gathered over the phone, he seemed sincere and personable. I had heard he was a high earner, but he didn't seem to indulge in luxuries. It appears he leads a modest life, but if one reason for that is my sister-in-law's lies, it complicates my feelings. This is a reunion with her after decades. My sister-in-law, not expecting her mother to be home, stands frozen in shock, her eyes wide. The sister-in-law I remember from my memories liked flashy things, but the one standing before me now is flashy in a gaudy, almost painful way, lacking any sense of style. The three of us had agreed in advance to play along with the narrative she had crafted. We decided not to mention her lies. Long time no see. You look well, that's good to hear. My sister-in-law was taken aback by the sudden kind words, but managed to respond to her mother, her voice faltering. She probably thought she was being confronted for her lies and was expecting a scolding, but was disoriented by the unexpected kindness. It's been a while. Have you been well? We didn't tell her the truth about her father's death, maintaining the pretense that he was still alive. I also offered a customary apology for not keeping in touch. My sister-in-law replied demurely, "I'm glad to see you're well, Mom. I've been worried about you." But she didn't mention anything about her father. I was concerned that my husband might accidentally mention the caregiving expenses. It seemed that she hadn't been caught in her lies yet, at least in our earlier meeting with her husband. She probably thought she could get away with it without being caught. "I'm happy to see you both doing well as a couple," my mother-in-law said. She praised her lavishly, hoping it would inspire her to start repaying her husband, even if just a little bit. Emboldened, my sister-in-law started making promises about supporting her mother if she ever needed care, even going so far as to say not to worry about money. It was audacious of her to say such things in front of her husband, who had believed and supported her. I felt sorry for him hearing all this. We decided to just express our gratitude for the day and leave. It seemed that my sister-in-law was using the money she begged for herself. Not knowing where she spent a large sum like $30,000, we decided to have a detective investigate her financial activities. The monthly caregiving money, supposedly hundreds of dollars, was indeed being used for herself. Additionally, she was deeply infatuated with a favorite host, supporting him extravagantly. She spent lavishly on expensive bottles and, before she knew it, couldn't pay her monthly tab. The total debt she accumulated was 3 million yen. Upon learning this, her husband was furious and decided he couldn't overlook it anymore. He completed all the necessary procedures while she went on a trip with his favorite host. Unaware of all this, she returned home after a few days to find the house empty, with neither furniture nor personal belongings, a complete vacancy. She contacted me in a panic. At first, she was quite hysterical, but when I asked, "How was your trip with your favorite host?" she suddenly became quiet. She couldn't ask how I knew, as it would be an admission of her actions. Now it was my turn. I revealed everything to her, leaving no room for rebuttal. "I think no one will want to help you now," I told her, "after you betrayed your mother and your husband by taking advantage of the situation." I also informed her that her father had passed away. Though she didn't know about his death, using her parents' care as an excuse for money was questionable. When I told her that her ex-husband knew the truth, she seemed to realize she was abandoned and let out an almost hysterical cry. Her ex-husband didn't want to talk to her, and I didn't want to burden my elderly mother-in-law, so I stepped in as the intermediary. My sister-in-law was still ranting on the phone. Unaware of her father's death and using him to swindle money, she was pitiable in a way. It might be too late for her to have any regrets now. I delivered the final message from her ex-husband. He says he will bill you for all the money you spent on your host. Please take care of the $3,000 debt yourself. Later, her lawyer sent her the documents for the proceedings. She wanted to talk to her husband, but he refused to respond. He was furious and didn't want to think about her, even for the sake of legal proceedings. With no compromise in sight, my sister-in-law was forced into a modest lifestyle, working to pay off her debts. She could no longer afford her extravagant lifestyle with her favorite host and was left with a mountain of debt. Occasionally, intimidating men would come to collect. Being faint-hearted, she was constantly on edge, fearing the debt collectors and the lawyer's notices. As for the three of us, we returned to our normal lives. Sorting through my father-in-law's belongings will take time, but we plan to live well for his sake. My mother-in-law is starting to show signs of aging, and we feel the need for her care might be near. We've discussed doing everything we can for her, to make up for what we couldn't do for my father-in-law.